Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Introduction to Safety Instrumented Systems and IEC 61511, presented by BakerRisk. Now, for today's webinar, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, we want to respond to your questions during and following this webinar. Please type all questions into the Q&A box in the Zoom control panel, as we will be responding live to all questions. At the close of our webinar today, please provide feedback by responding to our survey, where you can provide recommendations for today's presentation and future webinar topics. We're excited to have Wayne, Murtaza, Ben, and Amr present today. So without further ado, I will turn the time over to Wayne Repick, who is the Global Director of Business Development and Marketing and Communications, and the Key Account Program Director for BakerRisk, to make a few remarks.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Naomi. It's wonderful to be here once again for our 5th webinar. As always, I want to extend a few thank yous. First and foremost, to the Ministry of Petroleum for their continued support, His Excellency Engineer Karim Badawi, First Undersecretary Ala El Batal, and of course in the technical office, the staff that's been with us from day one in supporting and distributing these sessions, Wessam Sakar, Fatima Ibrahim, and Shema Sama. They've been instrumental in our success, and we very much appreciate the support that we have from them. So as always, we give you a lot of resources. This is all about knowledge sharing. So later on today, after this session is over, we're going to send out this deck to everybody. So you'll have the actual PowerPoint deck that you're going to see shortly. You're also going to be getting resources over the next couple of weeks. You're going to get an audio recording, complete recording of this session. So you'll be able to watch it. If you want to see it again, you can share it with other colleagues who may have missed it. You'll get some other resources that we have regarding our BRLC, our BakerRisk Learning Center, our resource guide highlighting all of our services that we have, any white papers or other documents that we can share with you, or that may be referenced here, or that may be referenced during the Q&A, and whatever else we can think of. We really want to share everything with you. Everything should be in your hands within 2 weeks, but the first item you'll get will be later on today, will be the deck, the actual PowerPoint deck. So with that, I want to go ahead and briefly introduce the 4 people involved in this session. And you can see them on your screen right now. First, a face that's very familiar to you, Murtaza Gandhi. He's been at the last several Egypts. So I know many of you have met him. You've talked with him quite a bit. He's been very active in everything we've been doing in Egypt. Ben Easton, who is no stranger to Egypt either, a University of Sheffield graduate, also a lecturer at Sheffield, and gives quite a bit of courses and has done quite a bit of work. He's a recent new hire for us, but we're thrilled to have Ben on board. Murtaza, by the way, is in Houston. Ben is in our UK office. A new addition is Hassan Mobashar. He is going to be in the background. He won't be presenting, but he's going to be instrumental in answering all the questions. And I see that he's already started on answering some of them that have been coming in. So as we've done in the past, all the questions that come in during the chat will be answered live. You will get a transcript of all the questions and answers that we give during this session. Anything else that comes in that came in during the registration. I think we had over 50 questions come in during the registration period. So we're going to compile all those, give you a thorough answer via the transcript, and that'll go out in the next 2 weeks as well. Hassan is leading the charge right now on the live Q&A. So thank you to him for stepping up for that. And then finally, somebody who you're very familiar with, Amr Hassan, our senior principal consultant. He'll be, again, speaking at the end, giving a recap. So with that, you have a great team assembled for this session. I know it's going to be very enjoyable. We have a lot of you that signed up for this, so we're thrilled to give it to you. So without further ado, let me hand this over to Ben Easton. Ben?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So welcome to our introduction on safety instrumented systems in 61511. Our key objective for today is to provide the attendees an awareness on the principles of functional safety according to 61511. That's functional safety in the process industries in respect to the safety instrumented systems and that are applicable to the process industries. We will discuss a background of functional safety. We will talk about what is the functional safety life cycle. We'll go through each one of the phases and give you an overview of all 11 phases. And we'll talk more about functional safety management, which is pivotal to successful functional safety. So first of all, before we talk about functional safety, we need to define what is safety. What do we actually mean by we are safe? Well, we work in dangerous industries. So the oil and gas industries, all petrochemical industries, process industries are dangerous. We cannot remove all risks. So there are going to be some risks that are still going to be present. So what we manage is to be free from intolerable risk. So this is the level of risk that we are willing to accept within the workplace from any safety, environmental, or asset financial loss. Now we understand what we're talking about in regards to safety, we need to look at what is functional safety. Functional safety is part of our overall risk management. It forms one of our protective layers or mitigative layers in regards to process safety. The idea of functional safety is that if the system is to function correctly, it will maintain the system in a safe state, preventing the hazardous event occurring, meaning we will prevent it. Loss of containment will prevent losing control. The pure concept of functional safety is what is for the system to work and work correctly is that we can prevent the hazardous event occurring. And we do this by the system functioning correctly. With regards to the functional safety life cycle, this is a systematic approach that we adopt to be able to manage the system to be safe. We need to understand what risks are presented and what level of protection we need. So this comes through our analysis phase. We then define what we need in terms of our system to be able to function correctly, and this is within our safety requirement specification. We can conduct regular functional safety assessments at different stages, and these occur between the analysis, realization, and during the operational phase. We then need to be able to design our system, validate it, and operate it. Throughout that life cycle, we are managing the system. So we need to have management processes, we need to have procedures, checklists. We need to plan the activities that we're going to carry out. How are we going to carry out? Who is going to carry out? What level of competency? And throughout the whole process, we need to verify. So we go through each of the life cycle phases and we say, we've said we're going to do this. We then confirm that we have done what we've said we're going to do. We have taken the required inputs, what documents do we need, and we've delivered the required outputs. So if we were looking at allocation of safety functions, we may be conducting a LOPA. Therefore, we confirm that we have received the HAZOP, the P&IDs, cause and effects. And the output from that life cycle phase is we have a SIL target, a PFD target, and a LOPA report. We're now going to start going through the life cycle phases and a bit of history of functional safety, and I'll pass this over to Murtaza to continue on.
Thank you, Ben. Let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so you may have all heard of this standard, the IEC 61508. This is considered to be the parent standard, and it's the fundamental SIS standard that's adapted and adopted globally throughout various jurisdictions, including that of Egypt. Next slide, please. So what is part of IEC 61508? It starts with the general requirements. So what are some of the general requirements regarding any sort of a functional safety system, which is your safety instrumented system as is more familiar with, or it can be part of a safety instrumented function, which corresponds to a loop and in a control system. So it goes over the general requirements, and then it goes over the overview of the various techniques for assessing SIL, as well as verifying that the SIL meets the target that was set in the PHA. So as Ben mentioned in the previous slide, in the part of the safety life cycle, in the analysis phase, where you would have assigned a SIL target, a safety integrity level target, this standard and the subsequent children's standards provide more details on how to achieve that. Also, for all the specific software requirements, so if the program is built in a certain specific SIS system, and you have various types of languages, whether it is ladder logic, whether it is a structured text or a functional block diagram, the requirements to achieve the functional safety needs are specified in IEC 61508. In other words, it specifies the limits of it, what needs to be done as far as each type of language, each type of code is concerned, and how can you convert the dangerous failures into safe failures. This applies to electrical, electronic, and programmable electronic safety systems, and that's a big point to emphasize here. What we understand of safety instrumented systems is the SIS, the SIS that you see in the field these days, which is a safety logic controller and then the associated instruments. But the IEC 61508 applies to something larger than that, which is any sort of a system that is used to meet a certain safety integrity level as defined in your LOPA, that the whole thing is encompassed in the IEC 61508. What does that mean? It means that if the system needs or is set up with relay or with pneumatic control or with any other thing, any individual controller. Sometimes there are individual controllers, let's say, for example, on a certain specific trip where it is just looking at one parameter, maybe a level, and then it goes into a specific controller and shutting things down. All that becomes part of the IEC 61508 requirements. There are definitions, detailed definitions of the various parts of this. So for example, what is an SIS? What is an SIL? What is an SIF, which is a safety instrumented function? All those are part of IEC 61508. It goes through the examples of SIL determination. So there's various techniques, whether you were doing a risk graph or whether it is done through a LOPA. Those techniques are specified or highlighted in the 61508 standard, and then the guidelines of the application, or how do you apply the SIS standard in the application, in the specific application that the site may be working on. Next slide, please. So the intent is to provide the basis for the SIS lifecycle, and that Ben had shown you an earlier image with the SIS lifecycle. It defines what is a safety integrity level. And in other words, if I was to summarize what is a SIL in very simple terms is the amount of robustness you need from your safety instrumented system in order to achieve the risk tolerance target that was set at the part of the HAZOP. So once a HAZOP is done to a certain risk tolerance target, and there is a gap that needs to be closed with a safety system, that gap in numerical terms is known as SIL, and that is defined at the time of SIL analysis. Point 3 establishes the requirements for the manufacturing of SIS instrumentation. So the one term that I used earlier was converting dangerous failures into safe failure. If at the end of this webinar today, one thing that the attendees can take is everything we try to do in functional safety is trying to convert the dangerous failures into safe failures. That establishes certain requirements for manufacturing, how it is manufactured, how it is programmed, how it is maintained, how it is operated, how it is demolished. All of that then starts making sense once we start understanding the general premise of functional safety, which again I'll emphasize is the conversion of dangerous failures into safe failures. And the goal for the industry sectors creates its own specific standard. So that's another specific thing. So IEC 61508 is a parent standard, and as we'll see in subsequent slides, each industry has its own specific standards. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, under the parent standard, there are various other subsequent standards. There is an automotive, which is 26262. There is a machinery standard. There are others in railway, medical, nuclear. The one that we typically deal with in the process industry is the IEC 61511, and that's the one that we will walk through more details on in this webinar today. So what does IEC 61511 comprise of? So part one is the framework, the definitions, the system, hardware, and the application programming. In other words, all the normative requirements of what does the system need to comprise of? How is the functional safety management system to be designed? How is it to be implemented? And then various parts of that functional safety management system, whether that is the hardware piece, whether that's a software piece, whether that's the instrumentation that connects to it, whether that's the communications channel, all of that becomes part of that part one. Part two is the guidelines for the application of IEC 61511. And then part three is how do you determine the required safety integrity level, which is, as discussed earlier, is part of your SIL determination, whether that is a risk graph, whether there is a LOPA or any other method. Next slide. So more details on the IEC 61511. So the first bullet on the left is that it covers pretty much all the industries that we normally touch with, whether it is oil and gas, whether it is chemicals, pharmaceutical, beverage, power, pulp, utilities, anything that has a process, a chemical process of any sort, generally falls under IEC 61511. Now, there might be some overlap in some cases, but in most cases in the industry that all of us deal with, the IEC 61511 is the predominant standard. Equipment that meets the requirements of the IEC 61508 or 511, including prior use. So if you have, once you've designed the system and that system is to be implemented, and we start looking at the various, let's say, instruments. I'm looking at a pressure instrument. What does that need to adhere to? Is there a requirement for it? What are the minimum requirements for that? All that becomes part of the equipment requirements for either the 61508 or 61511. One thing, and I'm making this a broad definition here. The detail instrumentation piece, there is further guidance in 61511. The software piece of it, or how that instrument is designed, that is more part of the 61508. So the application piece, a lot of it is in 61511. A lot of the detail hardware piece and the software piece is part of the 61508. There is another term right there, which is prior use. Prior use is an important element. If a site was to consider doing prior use and consider they have, let's say, an instrument that they have liked that has worked in their system for many, many years. That instrument may not be still certified. How is that instrument used in the specific application? Applying the prior use standard is also part of that clause. Also covers the legacy systems and any previously installed systems. And then very important, it's a pipe-to-pipe standard, so sensor to final element, which means that all the communications, all the wiring, logic, everything becomes part of the requirements. It excludes embedded software and full variability language, so that's part of the 61508-3 part of the 61508 standard. So it has the three parts that I showed. The third part covers all of that. Application program development, but not for SIL 4 applications. SIL 4, as at least what I have experienced, is primarily in the nuclear industry. In the process industry, we don't typically deal with SIL 4. And then it's the 6150511 does not deal with the compliance. It is part of the 61508. Next slide, please. Okay. So the safety instrumented function. Many of us are very familiar with what is a control loop. As we all know, control loop consists of a sensor in the field, mostly a DCS, or other term is basic process control system. DCS is distributed control system. Could be other things, could be another controller, but generally a control of some sort. And then the final element, whether it is a valve, a pump, compressor shutdown, or anything else. Any of those become part of the control loop. But now, if those elements are used in a safety system, and what there are requirements on independence, and how do you implement a completely independent safety system sitting side by side, but maybe on a higher level than your control system? All those, there are much more details involved in it. But on a high level, a SIF consists of a sensor, a logic solver, and a final element. As we are all familiar with, the logic solver is completely independent of your control system in most of the cases. And then most of the times the sensor and the final elements are also independent. There is another term here, which is the PFT average. So what is a PFT? Probability of failure on demand. In other words, it is what is the likelihood, or what is the probability that when I ask this system to operate and to do whatever it needs to happen. So if I need to shut down this valve, whether that shutdown will happen, what is the probability that it will not happen? That is the probability of failure on demand. Why is the demand piece so important here? It is important because the safety system is, unlike the control system, is just monitoring almost all the time. And it has to act only when there is a demand on the trip system. So in most cases, our control system is going to modulate and control everything. When it comes to the trip system is when the sys starts to come into action. And so that's why that the demand piece in the PFT is important. Now, each piece has its own probability of failure on demand. So the sensor, the logic solver, and the final element. And then the overall SIF PFT is the addition of those three PFTs. Okay, next slide, please. I want to get a few terms here that will help with the next few slides. So phases are the steps in the SIS life cycle. So there are 11 of those. And I think it was very apparent in the slide that Ben had shown earlier with the life cycle. There were 11 different parts of it. Those are the different phases. Stage is the functional safety assessment. So there are 5 stages when these are done. The first is done after the HAZOP and the LOPA or whatever SIL determination is done. Stage 2 is done after the safety requirement specification. Then the stage 3 is done after the functional, so the design is completed, maybe an FAT as a part of it is also completed. Then you do a stage 3. Stage 4 is generally done in normal operations, and then stage 5 is done at decommissioning. So there are various functional safety assessment stages, and we can provide more details on that along with the slide deck in the next couple of weeks, as Wayne mentioned. And then there are the other definitions, which is SIS, which is safety instrumented system, SIF, which is a safety instrumented function, and then the phases are the industrial automated control system. So there are different terms that I want you guys to remember as we go through the next slides of the webinar. Yeah, next slide, please. This is the one where we may be very familiar with, the hazard and risk analysis, which is to determine how a failure or deviation can be analyzed and how it can be designed to meet a certain risk tolerance criteria. So as you can see, there is a standard risk matrix here, and then our scenario started with a severity of 1 death or a serious injury, which is critical, and then the 1 per 10 year as the likelihood. And our goal really is to reach the risk tolerance criteria that has been set. In most cases, that may be the last row. In this case, for the specific risk matrix could be that number 3 that you see where the arrow ends. But if there is a gap in between, that's where the SIF comes in. Okay, next slide, please. We all live in a world of a highly connected system these days, right? And so a cyber threat is very real, happens, and if I've heard from a lot of experts, the one thing they say consistently is that the world gets hit by these cyber attacks all day, every day. And those do impact the control system, but also safety system. And while we're relying on these safety systems, if the cyber attack or the cyber threat has taken that safety system out of commissioning, well, that safety system is not any good. And so that's the reason why there is something called a cyber threat assessment that is performed as a part of the IEC 62443. And the requirements for understanding the risk, the vulnerability, and the threat assessment are now a requirement of being functionally safe. Also, with the rapid expansion of AI, that impact also needs to be considered as to what happens as more sophisticated algorithms could start attacking or could create a threat for our safety system. How do we protect against those threats, and how do we stay a step ahead of the bad elements? I think those are part of the security risk analysis under phase 1. Next slide, please. Phase 2 is the allocation of SIFs to protection layers. I'm not going to go in a lot of detail here. We may all be doing this on a regular basis, which is through a LOPA, layer of protection analysis, and or a risk graph. And so that method is understanding, okay, what other protection layers do I have for the scenario? And let's say I have a relief valve. Do I have maybe any other alarms? And then I've exhausted everything, and that I really need to rely on a trip system. How robust the trip system needs to be is what the allocation of SIFs or the phase 2 considers. Okay, next slide. Phase 3 is the SIS safety requirement specification. So this is a very important phase, and it basically creates the outline of what the SIS needs to do in terms of what the intent is, what needs to be done from a design perspective, what needs to be done from an operational perspective, what needs to be done from an independence perspective, what needs to be done from any connectivity. So for example, if that SIS is connected to another system, so many times it's connected to a control system for an alarm or to provide any sort of a set point. Any of those connections, any other external factors, where is it going to be located? Whether it's going to be outside in the element? If so, is it designed for it? What are the temperature requirements? What happens? What does the sys do in terms of emergency? So here in the US Gulf Coast, our issue is hurricanes. We deal with that on a regular basis. In Egypt and in the Middle East could be other elements. And so when we are putting these systems out there, or when we have our sys controlling some of those systems that are located outside or in the hazardous areas, how does the sys behave in those conditions are all part of the safety requirement specification, or the SRS. Next slide, please. So then we get into the design and the engineering piece. And this, again, based on the outline in the SRS, is performed. This is one of the longest phases in most cases for functional safety, outside, of course, of the operations and the maintenance phase. But here, the details on how the sys is going to be designed, how the sensors, logic solver, and the final element are all going to be designed and interconnected, is performed here. As you can see on the right there in the image, there are 5 different knobs that you can turn for the SIF, or the safety instrumented function, to achieve the safety integrity level. So starting with the architecture is primarily the voting. So if you have 2 devices and the voting is 1 out of 2, if there are 3 devices and the voting is 2 out of 3, 1 out of 3, etc., how is that selected? That's the first knob. The second knob is the testing frequency. So many times, if the testing frequency is extremely long, for example, in many offshore applications, it could be very difficult to test certain elements on a very regular basis. In those cases, the testing frequency could be extremely high, which means that the probability of failure on demand becomes higher, and that means that that SIF might not meet the SIL requirements. In those cases, the other knobs might have to be turned, or the testing frequency would have to be reduced to a level which is more commensurate with the requirements. Diagnostic capabilities. So now we have a lot of smart devices, and a lot of these devices have a lot of diagnostics. How are those diagnostics used? What do we do with it? Whether we trip, whether we alarm, and whether those functionalities are even available in our instruments, and how do we use that becomes a part of our calculation. Multiple SIS layers. If there are multiple SIFs that are connected to meet the SIL requirements, those are also discussed and designed here. And then finally, the device integrity, which is the failure rate of the specific device. If you have a level instrument, what is the failure rate of that level instrument? How that defines what the probability of failure on demand is. And that also is connected with the testing frequency. So how often it is tested, what is the failure rate defines the PFT, and then that PFT can be reduced by voting, which is the architecture, by diagnostic capability, which is the alarms or the trips, and then by adding more SIFs. So these are all interconnected knobs that become part of the SIS design. So I'll hand it over back to Ben for the remaining slides.
Thank you very much, Murtaza. So we're now in the situation where we have specified the integrity of the system that we need. We have written our requirements. We have designed a system to meet those requirements. We're now going to install that system. To install our system, we're going to have to write a plan. So we need to have our installation plan, how we're going to be function testing these devices, what's the competency of people who need to be involved, what the safety manual states. So Each device which is 61508 compliant will come with a safety manual. Within this safety manual, it'll tell you how to install it, what kind of tests need to be done, how it should be correctly wired, how it should be correctly earthed. Once we've installed the device, we're going to test, make certain the device does as we expect it to do, and that we haven't made any introduced any systematic failures. So these are the failures introduced by humans. So we're going to make certain we haven't left any packing in there, that we haven't left it in maintenance mode. Once we've finished those function tests, we're going to do our commissioning. So this is the commissioning pre-hazards being introduced. So we're going to be doing end-to-end proof tests, make certain the device operates as per the SRS, so that it has it operates within the timeframes that we need, it trips at the right level. As part of that process, we're going to be doing our integration. So generally, this would be part of the once it's installed on site, making certain it communicates with other devices, it communicates with our HMI system. Operators can understand what's coming up. The correct alarm tags are coming up with the correct priorities. We'll then do our full validation. Validation is slightly different to what a lot of people think. So we've carried out a FAT on our logic solver, so a factory acceptance test. This is normally done at the systems integrators' offices. We go there, we go through the cause and effects, and we say, yep, if we put this signal in, then it will trip X, Y, and Z, and it'll give us this feedback. Once it does as we intend, we install it on site, and we run a similar test with all the devices actually attached. But the validation needs to prove the full SRS. So as part of that, we're going to go through and we're going to say, right, do we achieve the proof test interval that we need? Do we get the correct diagnostic coverage? Does it operate in the environment that we've actually specified that it needs to operate? Obviously, there's a significant difference between operating in the UK as there is to operating in Egypt. We don't get many sandstorms here. You don't get as much rain as we do. So we need to make certain that it's the correct devices for the correct application. Once we've carried out the validation, we've said, yes, our SIF is fit. So our safety instrumented function is fit for purpose. We're then going to carry out a functional safety assessment stage 3. And that's going to say, yes, we have managed the risks as we expected to manage the risks. We've identified if there's any shortfalls and we've corrected them where feasible. We then pass this over into operations and maintenance. So during the operations and maintenance phase, we shouldn't be doing much with our SIF normally. So the SIF is meant to be there and it's just in the background waiting for something to go wrong. If nothing goes wrong, it shouldn't do anything. However, we need to maintain that integrity level. So we need to make certain it does what we need it to do when we need it. It needs to function as we expect it to, when we expect it to. Therefore, to do this, we're going to do some preventative maintenance. This is where we're going to test and maintain the equipment within the requirements identified in the component safety manual. So the component safety manual, for example, will say, you must do maintenance on this activity at the end of the useful life, which for a valve, for example, could be 5 or 10 years. So we're going to plan during our operations and maintenance that we're going to remove these valves, take it to the workshop, disassemble it, inspect the internal equipment, replace any seals, replace the packing, ensure that the stem is in good working order, and then reintroduce it back into the system as close to as new condition as possible. If we identify any other failures through diagnostics, through testing, through inspection, we're going to correct those within the mean time to repair. So this is the time period we have from a known fault through to getting the system back up and running again. If we find any equipment failures, we're going to document these. The reason we're documenting these failures is this is going to help us verify and validate the failures that we have claimed as part of our design. We're going to identify, are these safe failures? So a safe failure is the system puts us into a safe state, whether there's been a demand or not. For example, we are measuring high level in a tank. The sensor has failed. The sensor fails and drives itself into a high failure mode. So it trips the safety system, puts the process into a safe state. So we've had a failure, however, we have not lost our risk reduction. We are still achieving safety. If we don't maintain these components as regularly as we should do, these types of failures, safe failures, or otherwise referred to as spurious failures, can occur on a more regular basis. So we need to keep on top of it. More worryingly is we can potentially have dangerous failures. So looking at the same situation where we have high level in a tank, the level sensor fails and it drives low. Therefore, if we ever did get high level in the tank, it does not read that we have high level in the tank. It says we have low level. Therefore, the hazardous event, tank overfill, loss of containment can occur. We need to record any of these failures, and we need to do everything within our power to prevent these from occurring again. So during our design phase, we did SIL calculations and we did SIL PFD verification calculations. We've based these on a specified test interval. Normally, we would say once every year, but obviously these vary depending on your particular application. We made a lot of assumptions during that phase. So either we, as in the people who are doing the calculations for you, or yourself doing the calculations. These calculations, we need to prove that these assumptions are correct throughout the life. So we're going to say, yes, we've done the test every year. We've done it for 3 years. And at the end of each of these test intervals, the system has been in operation and it's been working as intended. If we keep doing the proof test and it keeps failing because maybe it's gone out of calibration or it doesn't respond within the SIF response time, then we need to review these calculations because we are not getting the safety level that we intended. After a while of operations, happens on all facilities, there is the potential that we're going to have to do modifications. These modifications could be to the process or to the SIF. So we could be changing the test procedures. We could be having to change the actual process itself. There could be changes within the chemicals that we're using within the process. We may have components that go obsolete, so therefore we're going to have to replace them. There may be changes to legislation. Any of these changes which have the potential to impact safety, we need to put these through a management of change. So this is normally part of your overall process safety management system. In addition to your normal management of change, we have to conduct a functional safety impact assessment where there is a SIF or the change may impact the SIF. This impact analysis is going to say to which phase of the life cycle are we going to take this work back to. So if we're changing the process operating conditions, then this is going to take us back to HAZOP, hazard, PHRA, whatever approach you choose to use. If we are changing a proof test procedure, then this is going to take us back to design because we're going to look at the SIL verification calculations. Do we still achieve safety? So the SIS modification, the level of work we're going to have to do for that change is all dependent on the level of modification we're doing and to which life cycle phase it goes back to. We may at some point decommission the SIF. So if our process operating conditions have changed so that we no longer need a SIF, then we may go into decommissioning of the SIF. We are not talking about decommissioning the process. We're not saying we're getting rid of the facility. What we're saying is we are changing, we're going to remove, we no longer have the risk gap that we had. We now no longer need the SIF. So we're going to either be mothballing the SIF or we're going to be physically removing. My advice would normally be physically remove if you no longer are using the risk reduction. If we're going to do decommissioning, we're going to follow the same process as if we were doing any other modification. So we're going to do a impact assessment. We're going to make certain that, yes, we no longer need these components. We're then going to review our associated systems, because we do have, as an organization, as engineers, there is a habit for us to say, well, yes, we have this system that we're looking at here. However, upstream, downstream, we have another safety system which will prevent this hazardous event occurring. Therefore, we're going to make certain that we have not taken credit for this safety system on other systems, because there may be knock-on effects which could actually take us out of our tolerance levels in other parts of the interactants process. Once we've decommissioned the SIF, that's the system out. We're now going to go into the different life cycle phases which occur throughout the life. So we've talked about phases 1 to 8 as individual life cycle phases. Phases 9, 10, and 11 occur all the way through the life cycle. These are our life cycle management phases. So one of the key phases that we need to look at is verification. So one of the key aspects that have come out from historical events is systematic failures leading to failure of safety systems, failure of the process. Systematic failures are failures that are generally introduced by humans. So there's a common saying that software doesn't fail. However, if somebody has made a mistake while writing the software, there is the potential for the software to fail. So that would be an introduction of a systematic failure. Other failures can be technician going out and calibrating a level sensor, and they miscalibrate the level sensor, which leads to it not functioning when we intend it to. How do we actually manage these, and how do we prevent them occurring? Well, we do this through verifying. So we've said we're going to do this. So we're going to calibrate this level sensor to 80% of tank capacity or tank ullage. We're then going to go and have a supervisor or somebody else check. Yes, I can come. We've gone through, calibrated the level sensor, and yes, it's set at 80%. Tick. Other forms of verification are during the design phase. We're going to do a design review. We're going to make certain the PFD achieves the target that we've actually required. We've got the correct hardware fault tolerance, the correct level of redundancy built into the system. We have the correct response time. We've actually followed each of the life cycle steps that we intended to follow for each of the projects. So verification is key to proving that we're doing as we said we're going to do. Verification is generally looked. So we do, as organizations, you may do this yourself, or it might bring somebody like us in and we would carry it out. But the outputs are generally looked at through third-party verifiers, insurance companies, regulators. They want to see your verification to prove you've done as you said you were going to do. Quite often there is confusion between verification and validation. So verification is an activity that we carry out at each life cycle phase. Each life cycle phase has a set objective, has required inputs, required outputs. Validation is a specific activity that's carried out following the SIF being installed and commissioned on site, and is an activity that is carried out to prove that the SIF functions as the SRS states. So validation always goes back to the SRS. Verification goes through each individual life cycle phase. One of the other means we have of managing the process is through our functional safety management system. Obviously, each functional safety management system varies between organizations. A systems integrator, an end user, a consultancy, all will have slightly different functional safety management systems. It is the process that we use, the processes, the procedures, competency management for saying, yes, this is how we conduct functional safety. This is how we manage our high integrity safety systems. These are the roles of the people who need to be involved in it. This is the level of competency they need. And you can always go back to the management system. It's a means for us to ensure that we have a consistent approach being adopted for the system throughout its life. We have functional safety assessments. Mertza talked about these briefly. These are conducted at various stages of the life cycle. So stage 1 is conducted after the SRS, stage 2 after detailed design, stage 3 prior to introduction of hazards, stage 4 during the life, so the operations and maintenance of the system, and stage 5 is after any modification or decommissioning activity. The purpose of a functional safety assessment is to investigate the safety instrumented system and provide an engineering judgment that the system is fit for purpose and provides the safety requirements, safety being safety or the environment, of what we have said we need based on the risk assessment. So functional safety assessments are generally carried out by very experienced, competent people who need to investigate the system and provide assurance that the system is fit for purpose. We additionally have functional safety audits. These are not the same as functional safety assessments. A functional safety audit is the same as your quality audit, your safety audits. These are you as an organization actively ensuring that your management processes are being adhered to. This is, so in terms of proof testing, having one of your engineers, having a senior technician, going out, observing people doing the proof tests, actually having a copy of the proof test with you, saying, so step 1, do this, step 2, do this, and then actually confirming and verifying, yes, they followed the procedure. Yes, these stages were done correctly. So the auditing is almost another verification activity. You are confirming that the management system is being applied as you have written it to. In terms of functional safety, all activities that we're carrying out are going to be carefully planned. We're going to have a verification plan. We're going to have a validation plan. We're going to have installation, commissioning plans. We're going to have functional safety assessment plans. So the whole purpose of it is at the start of the project, we know what activities need to be carried out, what level of competence we need, who or what role of person is going to be responsible for these activities, when are they going to be carried out, and what level of resources do we need. So in summary, functional safety is a life cycle activity. We start off by identifying our risks through a risk assessment or process. When we identify that there is a gap in our risk reduction requirements, we're going to do an allocation of safety function, such as LOPA. This is going to give us a defined risk reduction that we need to be provided by the safety system or other means. We're going to write a specification, which is going to tell us this is what we need our system to do with this level of integrity. We're then going to design a system to meet that requirement specification we've written. Once we've designed the system, we're going to prove it does, as we've said it to do. And we're going to do this through factory acceptance tests, site acceptance test, verification, design reviews. We're then going to have the system validated. So this is so we've proven that it works as intended. We're then going to operate it. And during operations, we're going to make certain the system maintains it through the 20, 30 years of operations. We're going to be doing proof testing, validations. We're going to be managing the competency of the people involved in the system. If there's any modifications, we're going to go back through the life cycle as stated by the impact assessment we carry out. And then at the end of the life, if the risk has been reduced, so we no longer need that risk reduction requirement and we're going to decommission it, we're then going to go through the same process, carrying out an impact assessment and ensure nothing else impacts our system. If you need any assistance with any of these elements, then please feel free to contact us. We offer a range of different systems that can be provided. I'm now going to pass back to Wayne, who will go through what's happened. Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Ben. Wow, quite a bit of information, very thorough. At this point, I want to introduce Amr Hassan, who many of you know. And Amr, are you on? Perhaps you can give a recap.
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Murtaza. Too many information. You almost covered everything, but I want to add, I want to touch 2 points. Early when we do in the design phase, when we are setting evaluating the scenario for cell targets, in particular for cell 3 targets. Cell 3 target we can easily design and purchase cell 3 device and systems. However, we have a challenge for the ensure the required proof test intervals are met. This challenge normally happens during operations. Why? If you have, for example, to have the proof test interval every 6 months or every 1 year, so you have to make a shutdown. Then you face a challenge with the senior executive and to stop the operations. So what's normally done? Then you have been asked to do risk assessment to postpone the target proof test intervals. Then it is basically you were moving to the normalized deviation. Instead of normalized deviation, is better in the early design of the project to see are you be able to meet the target of proof test interval for yourself or not. If there is a challenge, it's better to limit that. I will make the design. In that time, you have the options, putting IPLs to meet the design that we are going for cell 2 only. So my recommendation that you should be able to understand exactly what is required from the proof test intervals for your cell target. This first. The second point I want to touch also is in the design stage. The design stage normally is the first step that we have to comply with the legal requirement. Then we have to comply with the industry good or best practice. Then if we comply with both two, then we move to the ALARP demonstration. So what I want to say is that complying with IEC 61508 or 61511 is considered a good or industry best practice. So most of the companies or majority of the companies, they consider that cell requirement and LOPA is a good practice. Some minor companies, they apply, they do early go to the alert for this stage, but I just want to tell you that is the majority of the company consider the cell requirement is a good industrial practice, and you need to fulfill it. That's it, Wayne. Appreciate.
Great, thank you. Before I hand it over to Naomi, I know she has some questions she's got compiled from the registrants. I do want to ask everybody to send us in, and she'll remind you as well. But all of these topics that we do for these webinars come from you. So we get the ideas from you about what you want to hear. We go ahead and put the time in and putting it together. And these aren't us deciding what's going to happen. This is you deciding. So please feel free to send us, either in the Q&A now or in emails later on, what you would like to see coming up. Our next webinar is going to be in July. The one after that will be in December. It's every 4 months is our schedule, and that's been our series. So please feel free to send us what you would like to hear. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Naomi. Naomi, I think you've probably got some questions.
We do, and thank you to those who have already provided questions in the Q&A. So I am going to ask some that did come up during the presentation and beforehand, as Wayne mentioned. And if you haven't already done so, put those in the Q&A box in the control panel. So first question for our presenters, what are new trends in SIS considering AI?
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of changes. So with artificial intelligence coming more and more into the industry, there are aspects in terms of systems design. One of the areas that needs to be very carefully looked at when you look at artificial intelligence in the design of safety systems is there are a number of tools and techniques that we need to follow. So with regards to software, if you go to 61508 part 3 annex is A to D, there are different tools and techniques that we need to satisfy to say that we have the correct systematic capability for the software. One of the issues at the moment is that isn't something that's generally covered by artificial intelligence, because we obviously are a lot more flexible with artificial intelligence than we are with the design of other areas. So we are being a bit limited with safety systems, but that's good. We want to be unique. We want to be revolutionary in our designs of systems and software. But when it comes to safety systems, we like things that we know. We know how they work. We know how they fail. And it makes us feel a little bit more assured that it'll do its job. Things will change in the future, but a lot of the AI issues are more likely going to hit your functional safety elements in regards to security, because more artificial intelligence means more ways of finding ways to interfere with your system.
Okay, great. Thank you for that response. Next question, is SIS very expensive, and how do we manage costs?
Yeah, it can be. Like everything, it depends how you're going to do it. Individual components tend to be more expensive if they're 61508 compliant or certified, especially certified, because the manufacturers had to pay for somebody to go through that and to certify that they meet the requirements of 61508. Generally, if they are compliant, they've had to put in more work and more resource to provide evidence that that's the case. So they're going to be normally a bit more expensive. The majority of the costs come into the actual project. So planning it, making certain you do the HAZOP, making certain you do the LOPA, make certain you follow in the process, time and resource. However, the counterbalance is if your SIF works, then you keep your plant. It doesn't blow up. You don't lose all your product and have a big fire. So yes, it can be relatively expensive in managing it and implementing it. However, it's going to be a lot cheaper than losing your people, your facility, because that's what we want to stop. We don't want to lose that.
Gotcha.
Naomi, I want to add something on this question. Yes. Yes, it is expensive, but also we are dealing with a high hazard industry. So this is the price of going to the high hazard industry, which is nowadays this approach is acceptable.
Okay.
And one more thing to add as well, the operations phase, there is a lot more requirements as well, right? In operations and maintenance, so there is a life cycle cost that needs to be considered from the very get-go and kind of incorporated in the budget very early on, and that makes it much easier. Ben talked about the maintenance, the preventive maintenance, the predictive maintenance, and the run to failure model, right? If there is a lot of preventative maintenance that is done, it overall helps cut down the life cycle cost by making sure you're not changing cards as often, you're not changing instruments as often, or you're not having to deal with shutdowns, nuisance trips, or actual shutdowns because of failure of some sort of an element within the SIF. All those can really help reduce the life cycle cost. And so that should always be front and center when building these systems.
Excellent. Any other comments? Okay. So I know that cyber threat was mentioned earlier in the presentation. So the question that came in is, how is cybersecurity addressed in SIS design and maintenance?
So with regards to 61511, the primary requirement for cybersecurity comes out of clause 8.2.4. I know being a bit specific there, but might as well if I remember it. That's to do a cybersecurity risk assessment. So that's asking you to look at your major hazards and look, how can your system be attacked? Can it be the control system, the safety system? Where are your threats? Where are your vulnerabilities? How do they get in? In terms of actually implementing this into your design, making certain you've got a secure system, 61511 doesn't really tell you. It's not telling you how to do it. So what 61511 does is says use other suitable standards. So one of the recommended approaches, which is probably most globally put into place, is 62443. So this was originally ISA 99, which has now evolved into an IEC standard as well. Okay. These standards go through everything from management at the high level enterprise. So that's what we're on now. What we're talking through is our enterprise level, down to our field devices. How do we secure them using different technologies? The simplest way of doing it, which is not necessarily the nicest way of doing it, is take your safety system out of the loop. Put your safety system using hardwired relay style logic. If it has no software, it can't be hacked. But we've spent the last 10, 15, 20 years moving everything into programmable systems. So this isn't not a easy solution to take forward. But if you need to look how to design it, 62443 is one of the best approaches. If you need training in those areas, we have some training courses, but the ISA and TUV Rhineland also do training courses in those areas as well, depending on what your exact needs are. We've, as a risk management company, focus on the risk assessment element rather than the detailed design elements.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Another question is, why are SIL 3, SIL 4 SIF applications not recommended? So can you provide an example of what a SIL 4 application is?
Yeah. So the first reason these are not recommended is they're expensive. They require high integrity. They have to have a high level of competence to maintain them, which means you have more resource demands because you need to, generally, we don't keep those kind of people on staff. So you're going to be going out to third-party vendors to be bringing in the skill sets for doing things like SIL 3. In the process industry, SIL 3 is as high as we go, and that's generally going to be HIPS systems, or depending what organization you work for, you might have heard it more in terms of IOPS. So HIPS is high integrity pressure protection system. If you know IOPS, then you know what this is. It's the same thing, it's just a different acronym for it.
Okay.
SIL 4 systems outside the process industry, most of my dealings in this has been in defense sector, particularly in weapons systems, and it's where if the system goes wrong, you're talking about fatalities in the hundreds. So not just a couple of people, it would be a weapon taking out a cruise liner kind of situation.
Okay.
We avoid, so you do get them in trains, because obviously you have that potential. Some aeroplanes, nuclear, on the nuclear side of it, not on the process side. We avoid them because the risk reduction that you're aiming for and the level of systematics that are needed, so how to avoid introducing those systematic failures, are very onerous, far beyond what most process industries are willing to take into account.
Gotcha.
Very quickly to add here, Naomi. So
Yes.
The process of selecting that SIL targets starts very early on at your HAZOP and LOPA, right? So the criticality of what Ben is saying is it takes you back to ensuring that you set your SIL targets correctly. Many times, if we are not very consistent with applying the risk tolerance criteria or applying the risk methodology, we may end up with functions that are a lot of SIL 3 or any SIL 3 that might not be commensurate with the risk in that industry or that site. And so as long as your risk tolerance criteria is properly followed and the targets for the SIL are set correctly, then the cost is something that that may apply. So like Ben mentioned in HIPS application, in those applications, the risk is significantly high, that to mitigate that risk, something like a SIL 3, a high integrity risk reduction system, is required. And that cost and that design effort is good for that level of risk reduction that's needed. So set your targets very clearly and correctly, and ensure that any other protection layers that you can take credit for are available, are in good conditions, and can be applied properly for that scenario. Once all that is done, wherever it shakes out in terms of the risk reduction factor that's needed from the SIF, then that's where it is, and that's what needs to happen going forward.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Another question: what are the risks of bypassing or defeating a SIS function?
Yep. So basically, you remove the SIF. So you've done a risk assessment. You've said we have this gap that we have uncontrolled. We're not willing to accept this risk. By bypassing it, turning it off, you're basically going back to that unmitigated state. So if something is to occur, you are out of compliance. In terms of looking at it from a process safety case style argument, you've made an argument that we're safe to operate because we manage our risks like this. And what you've actually done is said, actually, that isn't true, because we've taken that away. So by bypassing it or defeating it, you've basically turned it off and removed that level of risk reduction, which is putting you into generally an intolerable state of risk control.
Great, thank you for
Naomi, I want to add something.
Please do.
Yes. Of course, we all want to avoid bypassing the SIFs, but in order to avoid this situation, you have to properly upfront know exactly what you can achieve, what you cannot achieve. So when you're doing early in the design, when you do silk assessment, don't put something you know that you cannot achieve. So when you do this one upfront, it's much better in the future during operation to avoid bypassing the steps. Because I have seen some cases, they do the design correctly, everything is great. Then we go to the operation, they challenge, they cannot achieve what they have been designed. So it's better to do it very early in the design to put something you can achieve. Thank you, Naomi.
No, thank you for that insight. It's helpful. Another question is, what's the difference between SIL determination and SIL verification?
Yeah. So SIL determination is the process we follow that to calculate what level of risk reduction we need and what level SIL that equates to. So that's when we do our LOPA, we do risk graph, fault tree. We're calculating what level of SIL isn't required. That's determining. SIL verification is confirming that what we have designed, what we have installed, commissioned, what we're in operations meets those SIL requirements. So during the design phase, this will be going through the compliance. Do we have the systematic capability? Do we have the right level of hardware fault tolerance? Do we use the right architecture? Is it going to meet our SIF response time? Are we carrying out the proof test at the right correct interval? Have we managed the systematic faults through operation? So determination is the engineering process we go through to say, this is what we need. Verification is the process we go through to say, have we done what we said we're going to do? And does it meet our requirements?
Excellent. And I'm going to ask one last question before we conclude the presentation and closing remarks. So what are the requirements of SIS in a PSM? Is it only compliance with ISO 61511, or should it be reflected in SCE's performance standards?
Yeah. So taking it from a more UK perspective on this one, I know we're talking for Egypt, but in the UK we have lots of different safety cases. So we have our offshore safety cases, we have our coma safety reports. In terms of our performance standards, the way we would integrate 61511 into that would be as part of our safety critical elements. We would say these instrumented safeguards, which are our last preventative line of defense, then that we would say in our safety, in our performance standard, that they are going to achieve the requirements of 61511. We can do it in terms of some of the mitigative safety functions. That's not advisable because there are other functional safety standards for fire and gas systems, for other mitigative active protection layers. So SIS forms part of the PSM, only a very small part. Remember, process safety is massive, functional safety tiny. Yes, we do form it. We are part of the safety critical elements, but we are the last line of defense when we talk about functional safety.
Excellent. So Wayne, Murtaza, Ben, and Amr, it looks like we've covered only a few of the questions that were asked, and I want to send a thank you to Hassan for answering questions in the chat live. We appreciate that. And if you have any additional questions, again, please type those in the Q&A box before you head out, and our presenters will get those questions answered, and we'll send out and post those responses via email, newsletter, on LinkedIn, and also on our BakerRisk website. So I'll turn it back over to you, Wayne, for closing remarks.
I think that's a wrap, Naomi. Good job. Good job, Murtaza, Ben, Hassan, Amr. Wonderful presentation. Thank you to everybody for hanging in there and for asking wonderful questions. Continue to send them. We will get them answered. You will be getting the deck within the next 24 hours, the PowerPoint PDF of the deck that you just saw. We will see you in July. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Very interesting questions. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
And so don't forget to fill out the survey that comes up at the end of this webinar. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your time. Bye-bye.
Bye.